Hi, thanks for tuning in. This is the ASX and Sectors weekly chart analysis for the week ending 30th of January 2026. The first chart is the parent index. This is the S&P ASX 200 index, the XJO. And you can see the market was up for the week. It's a blue bar. It did close quite poorly, down near the week's low. Supply was drawn out on Friday. We'll have to wait and see whether the supply is persistent and continues into next week. There's the highs of the range. Here's the breakdown line. Reversal. Then price spent some time in consolidation mode as it moved higher. And again here. Price pushed up 3 weeks ago, last week of consolidation, testing for supply. There was an attempt to move higher this week, but supply was drawn out on Friday and that forced a low close. I would expect the test for supply almost certainly in response next week, whether that be for the whole week, or whether that just be for a day or so early in the week to attempt to neutralise the inferred weakness from this poorly closing bar. It would be surprising, always possible, if the market just continued higher next week. Certainly possible. Much more likely is a test for supply below the previous bar's close, just to be sure that supply isn't going to continue being drawn out. If this pulls back like that and supply is found to be low on Monday and perhaps Tuesday, the market will then be in a position to make an attempt to push higher again in response in the later part of the week. And if supply continues to be drawn out, you'll probably see a lower closing bar, a little down bar, more like this, in response. This is the mid-cap sector. It closed lower for the week. You can see that supply has been drawn out and pushed price lower. Highs of the range through here. There was no breakdown in this market. Price held on at the lows. Markets come back within this range here and settled at a fairly logical level. This market would also most likely test for supply, narrow spread down bar, trading below the previous bar's low, attempting to confirm that supply is not going to be persistent and ongoing. And if that's the case, and it proves that supply was just a one-off on Friday, the market will be placed again to make an attempt to push higher. The small ordinary sector, very similar to the mid-caps here. You can see the market's been steadily moving higher. Mid-caps closed at this level. So this market's a little stronger. It hasn't come back quite so deeply at this point. But similarly, you'd almost certainly see a narrow spread down bar in response, at least early in the week, to see how much supply is drawn out. If it's found to be light, the market may attempt to move higher. If it's ongoing and persistent, you'll probably find a deeper down bar to some extent to really challenge the sellers in the market. This is the ASX financial sector. They closed slightly higher for the week, albeit with a narrow spread, which you would expect, seeing there was quite a bit of weakness in the market. Just to put some lines in quickly. Highs of the range, lows of the range and breakdown line. This is the market that dragged the parent index down. Lows of the current range. You can see this breakdown line stopped the market from recovering here. Prices pulled back within the range. This week the market closed slightly higher, albeit with a narrow spread. Volume for the week was actually fairly low, so it was just that the weakness, it wasn't overwhelming the buyers. Price traded inside the previous bar's range for the whole week. This really wasn't a very strong bar, there's no doubt about it, but in the face of broad weakness across the market, it was probably a pretty good job. If the rest of the market is going to test for supply early next week, this market will likely do so as well, something like that. And then same as the other markets, if supply is drawn out, expect this market to come down a little more deeply and challenge the sellers. And if supply is found to be low, you'll find the market will probably float up a little higher in response. This is the ASX metals and mining subsector. It attempted to go higher earlier in the week, and supply was drawn out mainly in the gold sector and some of the commodities. And that forced a poor close down near the week's low on slightly increased but not really seriously high volume. You can see the market's been steadily making ground for some time. Whenever there has been a down bar, there's been no downside follow through in response. The next bar has been up. This market will certainly test for supply in response, almost certainly test for supply in response, and then react depending on how much supply is actually drawn out. The ASX gold sector, it was where the weakness appeared to emerge from later in the week, and similar to the metals and mining subsector, you've had quite some period where bullish absorption has really been taking place, sort of like this, where you've had threatening down bars but no downside follow through in response, and the market really accelerated higher last week and has drawn out supply this week, mainly through the price of gold. I expect this market will certainly test for supply in response. If supply is found to be ongoing and persistent, the market will come back a little more deeply. If supply is found to be relatively light, following a test for supply, you'll see the market attempt to move higher again. It may be a half-hearted attempt, especially if it takes 2 or 3 days to sort out the supply issues. This is the ASX energy sector, and it's been trading quite positively over the last few weeks. Highs of the range come through here. We've had all this weakness and what have you through here for some time. But more recently, prices looked quite positive and it's pushed up to the highs of the range, closing just a fraction below, which is a perfect place for price to close prior to a weekend. So it's pushed up to that level. You generally see a little test for supply underneath the highs of the range prior to any attempt to challenge that level. And that's likely what we'll see, seeing I'm expecting the broader market to be testing for supply early in the week. This is the healthcare sector. The price continues to trade sideways in a consolidation mode. We've had the thrust lower beginning to shorten, and although we've seen it previously through here, the market is looking like it's attempting to consolidate and perhaps even accumulate through here. But at this point, this market is looking much more stable than it has done for some time. It may prove that this whole area is a part of an accumulation overall. We'll just have to wait and see. But at this point, the market's stabilised to some degree, and it's looking much more like an accumulation pattern maybe beginning. This is the ASX industrial sector. It's been trading within the range of this up bar for some time now, looking like it's attempting to consolidate and recover from the issues that have emerged more recently. Highs of the overall range come through here. Lows of that range come through here. It's a fairly broad range. We've had all sorts of weakness emerge from this point on. and the market's really trying to consolidate now. It's trying to stabilise within the range of this up bar on the high volume down here. Price is looking quite steady. It doesn't look threatening as it has done previously. It'll really take a breakout above this level before you could properly trust the market. But at this point, there is certainly an attempt underway to stabilise the market and perhaps prepare for a push higher in the future. This is consumer staples. Lows of the range through here. They were threatened this week. Highs of the range through here. Lows of the range above through there. You can see the market's been trading sideways for quite some time. Whenever the lows of the range are threatened, buying support comes in. Whenever the market pushes above the highs of the range, supply is drawn out. You can see this week the market did trade below the previous bar's low and below the lows of the range, but it did recover and push higher in response and back into this zone of relative safety. It's a sideways trading range in here. It has been for a while. I don't expect a great deal of push higher here. I expect the market will probably attempt to stabilise within the range. If there's ongoing weakness in the market now for a while, you may see price push up higher because this is considered more a defensive sector. However, I think the market will probably test for supply at this level. It's up near the highs of the range, the sideways range, and then we'll see how it moves from there. I'm not expecting any great breakout at this point in time. This is consumer discretionary. There's been some attempt to stabilise the downtrend more recently, and price has been trading sideways for a number of weeks now. There are some signs of an attempt to stabilise the market through here. I note that this week's bar has come back down and closed right at the lows of the range. So it's threatening to break down again. It'll be interesting to see whether this market really can find enough support to find enough buying support to defend against supply at this level and hold on and not break down. It'll be important for this market in the near term anyway. The ASX property sector, it's trading down near the lows of the range as well. Actually threatened the lows this week and recovered to close mid-bar on about average volume. It was slightly increased and up to average, so it was genuine trading. So this is an attempt to support the market right at the lows of the range. This is where the market will break down from if weakness overwhelms the buyers. If it does so, it'll probably be coming down towards this level, I expect, somewhere in here. There's perhaps some minor support below that, but I would expect if the market breaks down here, it'll end up trading back down towards this level. You can see the market had a more narrow spread this week, increased volume, mid-bar close. There's an attempt to defend against supply at the lows of the range and hold on and not break down. That was a pretty good effort, really. Just back to the parent index quickly. It closed slightly higher for the week. The close itself was poor down near the week's low. I think it closed as an up bar mostly because the financial sector was acting a little stronger than some of the other associated markets, and that helped this market in particular hold on, whereas the mid-cap sector actually had a pretty serious down bar. You can see the financials closed slightly higher for the week. That held the parent index up just a little bit. I expect this market will probably test for supply in response next week, and that will happen At the same time, it tests for strength, this level, the last breakout line. And within a day or so, we'll easily be able to see whether supply continues to be drawn out, in which case price will probably come back a little more deeply, or if supply is going to be low, price closes back up towards these levels, which would open the door for price to move higher again. Okay, thanks for your time. See you next week. See ya.